Yes, thank you for sharing our sessions. And the title of this session is Preserving Security and Privacy. As you know very well, the immutability and the transparency of the blockchain often conflicts with security and privacy. In this session, we will deal about this. For this, we invited great CEO and researchers in these areas. I'll introduce you from my
Yeah, sure. Hi guys, my name is Kristy Kim. I'm a founder of Ombredata. Ombredata is an alternative data marketplace for lenders. So we help lenders to augment their underwriting algorithm by using our alternative data in the US.
Hi, I'm Guy Zyskind, the co-founder and CEO of Enigma. I guess the high-level pitch would be that we're building the privacy protocol for the new decentralized internet. A more grounded one is that we're trying to solve the problem of privacy, most concretely smart contract privacy in blockchains.
Hi, my name is Kei Oda. I head up the APAC office of Quantstamp. Quantstamp is actually a US company, Silicon Valley based. We are a YC-backed company that formed last year. And yeah, I guess the high-level pitch is we do blockchain security, but you know, our core business, and I guess the business we're probably best known for is smart contract security, auditing security.
I'm Dean. I'm a researcher and auditor at ZK Labs. We're a security company. We do smart contract audits as well as research in crypto and blockchain space. And then I'm also a researcher and backend developer for ENS, the Ethereum name service.
In last 5 minutes, I will get some questions from the followers. So you should remember the name of these guys from my left side, please. And Guy, and Kay, and Dee. Can you remember that? Yes, let's begin. Kristy. How many or fintech industry in the US look at blockchain?
So in the US, because I'm based in the US and in San Francisco to be specific, so I see lots of interest, especially in financial industry. So all the banks, they are interested in learning more about it, and they have internal team. For example, city groups, they do have a small team, and they are only looking at blockchain and doing research. There's lots of interest. However, I don't really see much activities going on yet. And I asked them, like, what's the reason why you guys have a team that are looking at blockchain and doing research? And I spoke with them personally, and they actually know a lot. They are quite knowledgeable. But the issue is, because it's highly regulated, they do not want to do anything until regulators come up with a guideline. So now they are like waiting, but the positive angle is they are all looking at it internally, even though they don't mention it like publicly that, oh, we're able to do something internally. They're actually pretty active and trying to learn more about it.
Ombredata. Why your company decided to use blockchains? I mean that blockchain has some conflict with the privacy, but privacy is very important in fintech and the medical industry.
Yeah, sure. So to tell you a little bit about what we are doing is we get the data from the individual user. Let's say, Kristy, I am a good customer, good user, but I happen to have a bad credit score. But let's say I have only 500 or 600 credit score. Because the US credit score system is very archaic. And then I can come to Ombredata and then I can submit my alternative data. It can be my social data, my Facebook or my LinkedIn, Twitter, or it can be my alternative asset data, like Coinbase or Binance. Or e-commerce purchasing data, things like that. So I give permission to Ombredata to capture all the data source, And the Ombredata, we clean the data, index the data, and then eventually make this data available to the lenders, like Wells Fargo or other banks. So actually, I can do this without blockchain. So I can do it in a centralized way, no problem. So my co-founder, he's from Google. He's a senior engineer at Google. So we've been discussing whether we should even care about blockchain, because what I really care about is fixing the real problem, right? Technology is just a tool. And for me, I just want to help people to get the loans from the bank that they deserve. So the conclusion was blockchain has very clear benefits when it comes to transparency and incentives. So let's say Kristy gives data to Ombredata and gets a loan from the bank. Kristy's happy. But I want Kristy to stay on Ombredata platform. How am I going to incentivize her to stay with Ombredata? And so Ombredata can give her tokens in the future when other companies want to buy her data. So we use tokens as incentives to encourage users to stay with us. It's more like a user retention strategy for us. And the second part is transparency. So we will use public blockchain. So individual data providers can see like how many times Ombredata sold their data. And then they know that there is a 100% guarantee that they will get compensated for that.
But that transparency makes that transparency affect the privacy of the users. How do Ombredata solve that problem?
Yes. So we are going to use public blockchain, but right now, as of today, I don't think there is any clear blockchain solution, like layer 1 solution that I can rely on, to be very honest. So we are at this stage that we are positive that next year there are many blockchains, layer 1 solutions. They're going to launch their mainnet, and I'm very positive that they can actually deliver what they promised: speed, scalability, and privacy. So I did research at Berkeley with Oasis team, for example, and that's one thing I really cared a lot about. So, like layer 1 blockchains like Oasis and some other blockchains, what they promise is that, yeah, you can put the data on top of public blockchain, you can encrypt it, and when you compute the smart contract, we can guarantee the speed. And it's going to be efficient when it comes to cost, right? So I'm hoping that I can actually see that next year. So I would say TBD. When it comes to which blockchain I'm actually going to use, but I am pretty positive.
We will invite you again. Hey, Guy, your company Enigma made some solution, some kind of a security and privacy platform for the blockchain businesses. Is that right? Yeah. Why is it so difficult to solve the privacy problems in blockchain?
Well, first of all, I mean, just looked at, so I think the problem of privacy in blockchains, you can kind of separate it into two. There's the transactional privacy problem, and that is specifically for payments. How do you hide the amounts? How do you hide the senders and receivers? And just see how many competing technologies and implementations just for that specific problems they are. You have ZK snarks like Zcash, you have ZK Starks, you have bulletproofs just on the zero knowledge fund, you have ring signatures, you have Mibel Wimbel, you have many others. And it turns out that solving privacy, I think, is actually harder than solving consensus. Now, when you want to upgrade that and think about how do you protect data, the privacy of data, of arbitrary computations, of arbitrary smart contracts, I think that problem becomes, 10x harder. So that's why it's challenging, and I think long after we solve the scalability problem, we're still going to be trying to improve the privacy aspect.
But nowadays, most of guys use general knowledge techniques, secret multiparty computations, and homomorphic encryptions. But all of them is too complex to adapt to the blockchain. I think so.
Too complex for the developer or too slow?
Both of them.
Okay. So from the developer's perspective, a lot of the work we're doing is actually to streamline it. So the developer writes like one code, doesn't have to know anything about cryptography, doesn't have to know anything about privacy. You write a smart contract, we call it secret contract. You put the function, just the code, and that's it. All of the input, when a user sends input to that smart contract, that's going to be encrypted on the client side. And again, the user does not have to understand anything about encryption or MPC or zero knowledge or anything else. So really abstracting it away is the right solution. When it comes to speed, there's a lot of advancements. I'm actually super optimistic about the last decade of advancements in mostly MPC, secure multi-party computation. There's also trusted execution environments, which is a great solution that we're also employing right now, which can give you, I'd say, a good enough solution for some use cases. But at the same time, if you want more privacy, stronger privacy, then you gotta have to give up a bit on performance. So it's gonna be a trade-off. It's gonna be up to the developers to decide on how much privacy they want versus performance. But from a complexity standpoint, that's a solved problem.
Do you have any real experimental result of your platform?
Like users? Yeah, so we have several companies actually building on us right now. We have secret voting, both Aragon and Ocean are building their decentralized governance applications with voting where all the votes are encrypted. There's auctions, smart contracts that people are building. There are use cases around personal data and personal data marketplaces, real estate data marketplaces, machine learning over encrypted data like credit scoring and other applications, and lending applications. There's quite a few.
Yes, and this question is for both of you, Kristy and Guy. Yes. The privacy law is different in each country, but blockchain service is globalized regardless of the border. How can we solve these problems? Do you have any solutions?
So I am building an application. So for application perspective, I don't think that I have to target multiple markets. As a business, I'm trying to focus on one market and then do a really good job in one market first. So, for example, Ombredata, so in the US, because banking regulations are so strict, and then privacy law and Fair Lending Act and things like that, for lenders, it's really hard to acquire alternative data, whether it's on blockchain or not on blockchain. So our job as a company is helping these lenders to access the data without taking any data custody risk. So for example, let's say Ombredata will put all the data on top of blockchain and then let the lenders to access the data using the smart contract. They will just deploy the smart contract and then we will compute everything on our blockchain and then send them the end result back. So in that way, they don't actually store any raw data in their system, in their computers, right? So because I provide this solution, my clients, the lenders, banks are really happy and they want to work with us, they want to be our customer. So in the US, actually the fact that laws are very complicated and slow, it's good business opportunity for me as an application. It really, so when you are building an application, regardless if you're using a blockchain or not, you really have to think about like what you are building, like how it's gonna walk around the regulations, and whether regulation can actually give your service more value, because companies will need your service more because of the regulatory issues.
How about GDPR?
So Ombredata, actually we are okay. We are compliant with GDPR because we get the data from the user after user consent. So in that way, we are 100% safe.
How about you, Ben?
So, I mean, just to reiterate, I think the big problem with regulation right now is, you're right, it's different with every country. Most countries trying to protect data privacy want the data to stay siloed and not move between jurisdictions. That's a real problem that we've seen pretty much all over. And I think this is a classic example of regulation lagging in comparison to technology, which is on the one hand unfortunate, but I would at least say that the spirit of regulation is in the right place. When it comes to more practical and pragmatic solutions, I think the first step would be to create some hybrid systems. For example, with GDPR compliance, right? GDPR compliance, it's really a problem to move the data across jurisdictions. So one solution I think would be to maybe have like a public chain that's kind of like managing all of the infrastructure, but the actual data living on plasma chains or centralized servers or consortium solutions, again, that are pegged via something like Plasma, and these are running on a more siloed, I guess, per jurisdiction places, and combined with technologies like Enigma is developing, these would be able to protect the privacy of the data in their own jurisdiction. I think that would be a good intermediate solution until regulation can keep up, and we are also trying to talk to regulators and explain that, you know, that there should be new definitions that accommodate the public blockchain space.
Yes, and then yes, now let's talk about the security. Yes, we have two hackers in these areas, and this question is for both of you, Kay and Dean. How serious is the security problem with smart contract or the mainnet of the blockchains?
Well, we have to define what security problem. There's the problem of smart contracting languages being very new and there being compiler issues and people writing buggy code, but then there's also the security problem of people writing bad business logic. And I think the one is starting to mature, which is that smart contracting languages are getting better and we're starting to phase out bugs we had in compilers. But the business logic problem that people are writing buggy code or people are writing bad business logic is still very existential and is still quite a large problem.
Yeah, I would actually concur with that, and I would also add that the main problem is that there are actually no standard rules for how to, you know, program a good smart contract. And you know, when you say I'm going to get a security audit, there's actually no definition of a smart contract security audit either. So you could go to one guy sitting on a beach somewhere, you know, takes a look at your code for 30 minutes and says, yeah, that's fine. You know, audited, done. Or you could go to Quantstamp, where we would probably have 3 to 5 engineers auditing your smart contract and take, you know, 10 days to 2 weeks to do, you know, an audit. You'll get a 10-page report, you know, blah, blah, blah. And the two things are the same in people's eyes. I got an audit. And so I think what's really important is to figure out as an industry, you know, what exactly a security audit means, and you know, how is it helpful to, you know, secure your smart contract, which may have, you know, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of value stored in it.
Have you ever checked the Korean company's code in your company?
Have I audited Korean companies? I don't think we actually have. No.
Yeah, we've done a couple. I would say you know, the results are mixed. One was extremely good. One was not so good. But I think that that's, you know, you get that kind of you get that difference in quality in many different countries. And so, you know, I don't think there's anything specific to Korea that you wouldn't find, you wouldn't get in other countries.
Here are audiences who are not familiar with security and privacy topics. Would you explain us about how we can check the security of the smart contract? Is it the same as the ordinary softwares or different?
So if you're trying to use software to check the security of your smart contract, you're gonna be very disappointed because a lot of the tooling in this space is very mature, and a lot of the tooling that currently exists is already hard for an auditor like me to use. And so if you're a regular developer, there's probably a very high barrier of entry for you to be able to use any form of security tool. So this might sound a little biased coming from an auditor, but probably the best way to ensure that your smart contracts really are secure, you're gonna probably want to go with an audit. And you're gonna want to do enough research to make sure that you find a reputable auditor, and like Kay said, that you don't end up with some guy who's sitting on a beach and quickly scrolls through your contracts and tells you everything's safe. There's definitely those two types of companies, and I think with a lot of the initiatives which we're working on with like security and stuff like that, it's starting to become clear what companies you want to work for and what type of audits you want to look for and what to expect from an auditor.
Yeah, again, I mean, I think I agree, like automated solutions are difficult. Just to give you background, Quantstamp was originally you know, formed as a company to build a decentralized protocol capable of auditing smart contracts automatically. And you know, while that's a very you know, I think the end goal is extremely you know, important to the space, given the number of smart contracts has literally exploded from you know 10,000 at the beginning of 2017 to over 8 million today, and this is just on Ethereum. It's clear that manual auditing is not a scalable solution for you know blockchain in general. So I think that ultimately this automated software will become important, but at the moment it's very it's still nascent. We think that you know the protocol that we're building tries to wrap the analyzers that exist today to make them easy to use. But even then, as Dean says, you get a lot of false positives, you get false negatives, and essentially it's really hard to interpret the results unless you are a security expert. And so ultimately, you know, I think there's still a role to play for manual auditing companies. What we are trying to do is to reduce the input, the human input, so that we can drive the cost down and make it affordable for everyone to develop safe smart contracts.
I mean, one of the problems with the automated tools as well is that they'll find bugs, but they won't find bugs in business logic. They'll find if something is wrong according to a unit test, or they'll find if you have a wrong symbol somewhere or something, but they're never going to be able to fully validate your business logic unless you've taken the time to write a formalized spec. And even then, there might be certain bugs which just happen when a human is working on something, where you should probably work together with a security expert. Even if that's not an audit, having a security expert on your team or whatever, you still need that. Especially if you're writing critical stuff where value is stored. For smart contracts where value isn't stored and they're not high, or that there's not a high cost or effect if something goes wrong, then you're usually fine on deploying something on mainnet without getting an audit. But the second users are entrusting a lot of value into your smart contract, you should definitely want to work with multiple security experts.
Yes, but the smart contract is run on the blockchain networks in the distributed fashion. So, is there any dynamic analysis platform in the blockchains, like Camo and so on? We should check the not only static analysis, but also we do the dynamic analysis.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any dynamic analysis tools. For the only tools I know of are pretty much static analysis tools.
Yes, and people argue that current programming language for smart contract is not good. So some people say that we should develop some another kind of programming languages for smart contract to improve the security and privacy. How do you think about it? All of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to take first stab at it. I certainly think that there are some problems with Solidity, for example. The attack surface is generally considered to be quite large. I also think that there are a lot of very talented and smart people working on alternatives. You know, just to name a couple, I would say, you know, the folks at Zilliqa out in Singapore who are good friends of ours. They're developing Scilla smart contracts, and you know, Cadena, who is represented here, I know Will is working on you know, a very cool smart contract platform as well. So over time, I don't think it's, you know, you don't have to say that Ethereum is the only smart contract solution. I think there are a lot of very cool projects going on. So whoever ends up, you know, getting the consensus, you know, 5 years down the line might be the winner. But at the same time, you know, I think Solidity and, you know, Ethereum space in general has come a long, long way. So that, you know, we're slowly bringing in concepts of, for example, templating smart contracts, so that a lot of the work has already been done, and a lot of the code has already been audited by professional security experts. And so I think that will make smart contracts safer, you know, just by virtue of having experience. You know, Ethereum is still only 4 years old at the end of the day.
So, adding more languages is a trade-off. One is there's the positive that we have more languages, but then there's also the negative that, for example, with something like EWASM, we take away a large barrier of entry, which we had for Solidity. And as elitarian as that may sound, for something like blockchains where people are working with value and working with millions of dollars in value, I kind of want to have a barrier of entry. I don't want a guy who made a website once in his life to then start writing smart contracts which are responsible for transferring value. And when we start adding more languages, we make our job a lot more difficult. I'm not complaining about that. I'm very dynamic in learning new languages and learning how new compilers work. But we take away from being able to be an expert in one thing, and we have to be experts in a lot of different things and very complex things. Like EWASM is a lot more complex than the EVM is right now. And once we introduce that, as said, you have the barrier of entry gone down, so any developer can start developing, because pretty much you can find a compiler for pretty much any language which compiles down to EWASM. And that's to the point where we're now going to have to start validating code on the bytecode level, essentially always, rather than on the Solidity level. I mean, we do validate stuff on the bytecode level right now, but not as often as we will probably have to be doing it in the future. So, and the other problem is the tooling doesn't exist. Every time we add languages, we go back to square one on the tooling. And so the progression of us being then able to have those tools is going to be back to square one, and we'll be sitting on a panel again and asking, so what do we do wrong? Why isn't there tools? Why aren't there security tools in this space?
I want to talk, so there's enough talk about from the auditing and formal and static analysis aspect, so I'm going to address programming language for blockchains from the privacy and scalability aspects. So from a privacy standpoint, you know, there's actually, as I said, there doesn't need to be much. You can pretty much pair it on top of any language. The only change that we're seeing that we need specifically to squeeze a bit more performance is just to introduce special types in the system. So for example, if you have an int today, then you want to have a secure int. If you have a float, you want a secure float. So that's pretty much the extent of the language changes that we would introduce for privacy on our end. From a scalability perspective, I realize there's a lot of, I guess, debate between, like, you know, was it being more complicated? But at the same time, you know, we built our backend using EVM to begin with, but EVM is really a toy. I mean, even the people who made it say that it's a toy. If you want to integrate data sources from the outside, if you want to be able to work with libraries that are commonplace, if you want to just have more scalable execution, with optimized backends that have been developed over years and years by many people, then you probably want to use other backends like WebAssembly. The last part on the privacy front is, I think that over time, so one more addition on the privacy front, it's not on the language itself, but if people really care about privacy, people really start to care about what kind of data do applications leak, right? And we're going to also integrate solutions like differential privacy. So you can keep data encrypted, input data encrypted, as we're doing on the language, but at the end of the day, when an application returns a result, that result is going to return some meaningful data. And there will come a question that asks, is that data meaningful enough that it leaks personal information or not? One solution for that is differential privacy, but I also foresee tooling that comes to place that actually go over smart contracts, go over smart or secret contracts, and actually examine what kind of leakage, what kind of data leakage can people and users expect in the worst case. And hopefully there will come auditors that are actually looking into making sure that these applications don't overleak data and protect people in that sense as well. So it's not just about protecting value lost from a monetary perspective, I think it's also value lost from data leakage.
Okay, you say that your company uses smart contract. Yes. But most people say that a smart contract automate the work, and the smart contract is a contract itself. But there is a gap between the coding the smart contract and laws.
Yeah.
Yes, there is some kind of interpretation gaps. How can you solve this problem?
So, to be very clear, we are not using smart contract in production now. We are testing it. We are using API right now. Because when you go and talk to your customers like bank, they don't want to talk about smart contract. So, I talk about smart contract and I tell them what it is and I tell them the benefit of it, like automation and things like that. But for now, I think, as we talked about, it's not ready yet for to convince the big traditional players like banks to use it. Like Bank of America, they have half of U.S. adult population as their customers, right? They are not going to risk anything. So for now, what we are doing is step-by-step solution that, first of all, I'm telling them that what I'm doing with or without blockchain, and then they see the value of it. And I tell them that, yeah, you can use our service using the API. And then next year, you can also use blockchain. And then I'm just more like taking step by step. Oh, and then adding one quick comment about the language and protocol or layer 1 blockchain. I think including Ombredata, many devs, we are language agnostic and protocol agnostic in a way that our end goal is solving the problem and helping our making our customers happy. And our customers don't really care whether which language we are using or which protocol we are using to, right? So for us, I think we are agnostic. We will just use a technology that's like easier to use and that's more stable.
And then this time I got some questions from the followers. Any questions? We have enough time. We have 5 minutes. Is that right? Yes. Hey, Beast. Do you have any questions? Beast is a secret guy from the line of Japan, yes. And he's a very famous hacker period.
네. 한국말로 하면은 질문이 영어로 통역이 되나요? 아, 네. 그 스마트 컨트랙 이제 그 오디팅을 툴로 만들어서 이제 하시는 분들이 많다고 들었는데 스마트 컨트랙에 보면은 굉장히 조건문이 많잖아요. 그 컨디션에 그 설정 컨디션 같은 게 있어가지고 조건에 맞을 때만 그 루틴 안으로 들어간다든지 이런 되게 그 기술적으로 할 게 많을 것 같은데 실제 메인넷에 들어가 있는 컨트랙들도 보시고 분석을 하는지 아니면은 그렇게 그 테인팅하는 기술 쪽은 아직 구현이 안 됐는지 네, 그런 부분 좀 궁금합니다.
You mean that there are so many conditional statements in the smart contract of the blockchain?
Right.
So he said that he asked that do you have any automatic tools to check so many conditional statements? You mean that because of the coverage?
Right. So the contracts have the certain conditions, and then if that certain condition will match the code flow going to the statement, or it's not going to the statement. So that basically, which means you have to track all the smart contracts related to the other smart contracts, but how do you handle it on the mainnet? You actually track all the data, or?
Do you mean how do we track it during the audit process, or how do we check it otherwise? Because during the auditing process, it's just through vigorous testing. Unit tests, we expect people to test every single contract they're going to be using. And we look through every single contract they're going to be using unless it's been audited. So I look through every single dependency. How you check that on mainnet, it's kind of hard. We expect people to write contracts securely enough that if something is wrong in another smart contract, that it will not affect the smart contract that a user is interacting with. And we have the abilities in smart contracts to do those kind of checks. But it's about educating developers to actually make sure that their code is written anti-fragile enough that everything can go wrong, but the user isn't affected.
I have a quick comment. So, and not just like the logic, also business logic can be an issue, because the one reason why I cannot have smart contract in production yet is, for example, when lenders, the bank, like let's say Bank of America, they deploy the smart contract asking some questions, Ombredata is supposed to give them aggregated level of data. What means is that they can ask, how many times Kristy made purchase on Amazon per year, or per month, or per weekly. So they can know how many, or they can see the category, but they are not supposed to ask exactly what Kristy bought to protect the privacy, right? So to guarantee that we have to come up with some type of smart contract template, or we have to audit that our customers will not like manipulate the smart contract or write the smart contract in a really smart way that they will actually get the raw data, or to get the info around the raw data. So that's not going to be captured by the auditing, right? So that's more like a business logic. So I think that's another limitation of smart contracts.
I think as an auditor, I definitely capture stuff like that because I expect my clients to give me a specification of what the expected output is and what the expected security of that is. So issues like that is, the logic issues which we're starting to look for as auditors has drastically decreased, especially with protocols which have been deployed, and we're focusing a lot on business logic issues at this point. So it's not just checking for bugs like, oh, you added this number wrong, but also for things like you mentioned.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I was just about to say business logic is actually probably the one thing where human checks are required. I mean, you can't use automated tools to check for business logic.
Okay. Yes, we have just 1 minute. So I want to ask a question. It's not a technological one. Recently, the US government said that ICO would be regulated as securities. What do you think about that?
It's good for the US
It's
government.
good? It's good for US government.
It's good for the US government. I frankly don't care.
Okay. Hey guys.
I think it's a case-by-case basis.
How about you?
It's not good for investment perspective. I mean, you are doing a project and then investors are worried about because of that statement. So in that regards, for the industry in general, it's not good because it's slowing down the money coming into the market. But overall, I always think that it's better to have regulation than no regulation in the US because, as I mentioned, enterprises, they're not going to do anything unless there's some regulation. So I think it's good that at least government is saying something better than nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, look, capital is fluid. I think intellectual capital is also pretty fluid. And so if the US is going to take a much tougher stance, then I think projects will move to jurisdictions that might be easier for them to try and do what they do. I'm not saying that that's necessarily a good thing, but in this day and age, just because the US says something, I don't think it's clear to me that everybody is just going to follow like they may have done in the past. That said, we do think regulation is necessary, but as with all things, over-regulation is the thing that really kills innovation. And it's happened in finance, time and time again. So I hope it doesn't happen in blockchain.
Okay. Yes, it's time to finish these sessions. Please give a big round of applause to these great speakers.